What's up guys, Jordan for Pre-Condo here. Today I want to talk about the fact that condo and freehold prices in Toronto are starting to curl. So we had a very good spring market, but things are starting to slow down rapidly into the summer, which is partially to be expected just from a seasonality perspective. We tend to see this every year, but this year especially so. So let's get into some of the numbers here. All right, the first thing I want to show you is a chart from Rob. So he took the data from Broker Bay, which is a software that pretty much everybody on the Toronto Real Estate Board uses. And so it has a very accurate picture of current showing velocity. So how many people are out there viewing properties on a daily basis. Black line here is for Toronto freehold and the red line is for Toronto condos. And what should jump out at you here is that we are currently at the lowest showing volume per listing for the year. So if you look at the average showings per listing in condos, we're seeing 11.2, freehold we're seeing 16.8. And that is lower than we were seeing in January of this year. And January was a pretty sleepy month. Now, the reason I'm starting with the showing graph rather than average price is because the Toronto Real Estate Board just released the Market Watch stats for June. And when you look at the numbers here, they're sort of misleading. As other realtors have mentioned on YouTube, they kind of give you a rosy picture of what the market is currently doing. So for example, if we zoom in here and we look at let's start with just the obvious stuff, sales volume. You look at sales volume for condos in the 416, it's up 24%. In 905, it's up 34%. So June of this year versus June of last year. And when you look at average prices, for example, condos are flat year over year. So June of this year versus June of last year, detached are up 2.6%. And so when you look at these numbers just from a high level, the market looks relatively healthy. Sure, it's not increasing, but nobody would expect it to with the interest rate hikes we've seen over the last 12 months, especially with the one we saw more recently. But I don't think this shows you the entirety of the current situation. And this gets a little clearer when you fire up House Sigma or condos.ca or whatever your sold data platform of choice, and you look at listings that sold recently versus what they sold for previously. You can see pretty quickly people are still taking losses on their property if it was previously sold at the peak. Here we have one example in Oshawa that was just sold for 1.275, but it was previously sold in March of last year for 1.687. So you're talking about a 24% difference in price, a loss of $412,000. Here's another one in March of last year for 1.635. This is a home in Mississauga, and it just resold for 1.27 million. So you're looking at a loss of 22% on this property. Here's one in Brampton, a nice freehold property. Again, March of last year, 2.35 million, just resold for 1.875. So $475,000 or 20% on this one. And as far as condos are going, they're actually going pretty well, all things considered. So when you look at price losses on condos year over year, here's an example at DNA 3 in King West, just sold for $725,000. And it sold at sort of the market peak, so January of last year, for $776,000. It's about a 6.5% difference in price. But of course, the loss of borrowing power from January of last year versus today is considerably worse than a 6.5% erosion. So this property is, in a way, beating the current fundamentals. And then we get another one here. This one is in Corktown, so sort of the east side of downtown, the nice part of the east side of downtown. $775,000 just sold for. It sold for, what do we have here? $826,000 last year. So again, about a 6% difference in price. So let's get back into the stats. Why are showing volumes starting to plummet? Well, it's because there's a lot more inventory now than there was during the spring market. So the blue line here is inventory. So all of the MLS listings in the Toronto area, just the quantity of resale listings that are on the market. And you can see through the spring market, it was pretty low. And then really in July, we started to see inventory climb and climb rapidly. And it is still climbing into the summer months, which are historically the slowest months of the real estate season, barring maybe December and January. And this is a great chart from Alex. Give him a follow on Twitter. He's got this little seasonal target. So he looked at the stats from 2006 through 2019 to get an idea of how many listings we should expect to see on the market at this time of the year. And as you can see, we are starting to run a little bit hot. So we have more inventory than we have historically ever seen at this time of year. And this increase in inventory is why we are headed so rapidly into balanced market territory from, through this spring where we were heavily planted in seller's market territory where any good properties were getting multiple offers. This is a chart from Scott Ingram on Twitter that shows months of inventory. If you're not familiar, it's a distillation of how many listings there are versus how many sales are happening. So it gives you an idea of market temperament. Anything above, 5 months of inventory is a buyer's market, and anything below 3 months of inventory is a seller's market. Anything in between is a balanced market. So you can see that condos in the 416 are We're about to break the barrier into balanced market territory, a place we have not really been since the beginning of this year. And freehold properties, while still in seller's market territory, if inventory continues to climb, which it looks like it's going to, they will be in balanced market territory sometime in the near future as well. Now, this chart here is my favorite chart of the week. This is a chart from Vass, and if you're not following Vass on YouTube, you absolutely should be. He just did a breakdown, and if you're someone who's more numbers driven and analytical, it's a great video to watch. And Vass is essentially what happens when you give a CPA a real estate license and a 2007 Excel license as well. So what he did was he took the median seasonal impact on pricing to get an idea of where prices should head over the season. Essentially, we all know that in spring market, things pick up, prices pick up. Through July and August, things slow down. It's a good time to get good deals. And then again, in December and January, the holiday months, prices tend to trend lower again. So that's another good buying opportunity. Really, when people are busy or away, tends to be when listings sit longer. And then the spring and the fall market tends to be when prices rise a little bit quicker. So the black line here is the historical median change on pricing. And the red line is what we saw this year. So you can see that this spring market ran considerably hotter than it should have, right? And that's no secret. If you're a buyer, if you're out there in the market, or if you've been a seller recently, you know that, right? The market's been incredibly hot, but it is starting to curl, and it is curling really quickly as all of this new inventory comes to market. Given we overshot the seasonality on the upside, I think there's an argument to be made, especially with the rate hike that we think is in the pipeline for tomorrow. I think there's a really good argument to be made that we also overshoot to the downside. So this is another fantastic chart. This may be my second favorite chart of the week, and this chart was posted on Twitter from none other than Doug Ford. This shows Ontario's population growth on a yearly basis, 2022 through 2023's growth. So second quarter of 2022 to second quarter of 2023 is unlike nothing Ontario has ever seen before. We saw a population increase of 504,000 people. And you're thinking, oh my God, this guy is showing population charts again. Why doesn't he just get into the immigration field? Well, give me a second. Friend of the channel, Daniel Foch, made this chart, and it's probably the best housing supply shortfall chart I've seen. I've made a number myself, but I've never thought to display the data this way, and it's amazing. He simply took the number from StatsCan of the population growth of 504,000 and divided it by 2.6 to arrive at the number that we had to build in order to keep up with population growth, just under 200,000 homes last year. And that leaves us with this gap here, which is stunning, startling, and alarming to look at. We are building far fewer homes than we need to build to keep up with this population growth, even if you assume that population per household is going to creep up, which is an assumption I think is fair to make. It doesn't really matter how you slice it. The reality is we're building far too few homes. And the reality is I don't think this situation is going to get any better. And on that note, Financial Post actually put out this article, Stop Bashing Housing Investors, Canada Desperately Needs Them. Now, I, for one, am okay with the public bashing me. They can bash me all they want. But this part is absolutely true. Investors fill a critical role in the capital stack for development. So developers are required to pre-sell a certain amount of their inventory in order to get construction financing to build those homes. It's a great read, and I recommend you give it a look. But basically what it comes down to is the fact that if nobody's placing an order for housing, that housing never gets built. And who places those orders? Well, it tends to be investors. But right now, investors aren't all that interested in placing those orders. And can you blame them? Interest rates are at all-time high, and cash flow propositions are at the worst they've ever been. This is a chart from Ben Rabideau on Twitter, and it shows the cash flow index for the city of Toronto. So essentially, the net cash flow is here. You can see that we went negative. So, the average price of a condo versus the average rent. So the servicing cost of that condo at 80/20 LTV. So assuming you're taking out an 80% mortgage at current interest rates, that cash flow went negative on average in 2019. And it is deeply negative now. What's even more interesting is even after you account for principal repayment, so principal recapture, because obviously when you pay your mortgage, you are paying back some of the principal. Even accounting for principal repayment on average, you're still cash flow negative. So essentially what this means in practice is that when you buy a condo, if you buy the average condo and you turn around and you rent it out and you have an 80% mortgage in place on that property, your upside is entirely measured in appreciation. So it's a speculative bet. And I'm not saying that's the wrong bet, right? It may very well turn out to be the right bet. I'm just saying that, of course, when people are looking at potentially investing in properties and they look at their rental income versus their expenses on that property, they're going to be far less likely to buy that pre-construction townhome or that pre-construction condo. And so really what I'm getting at here is we are already facing a massive supply shortfall. And this picture, I think, is only going to get worse in the near future. That's it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. If you found it useful, if you liked it, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next video.